So I'm Dr. Sharon Saline, and I'm thrilled to be here for these Attitude Facebook Live kind of little mini webinars. Hi, Emma from Sweden. It's great to have this community that we've created on Friday afternoons, and I love how people come from all over to chat with each other and give each other support, and let me offer you some support as well. Hi, Louise from Wales. So I want you to please check my website, www.drsharonsaline.com, for all kinds of free information and resources. I also have a YouTube channel, and I would love it if you would follow me on Facebook, where I post something every day that should help you in your life raising a child with ADHD or living with ADHD yourself. So let's get started today. We're going to be talking about transition issues as we all open up, as kids go back to school, or maybe you're going back to work. And there are a couple, there are 4 areas that I've identified that I think we might want to talk about today. So the first one is about anxiety. You know, trying to kind of go back and see people, talk with them, be out in the world. It's anxiety provoking, not just for kids, but also for adults. So there's social anxiety that's coming up. There's a kind of, health anxiety, and of course, a certain type of academic anxiety. What will it be like for me in school now that I'm in person? There are also issues of focus. Our focus is changing, perhaps from being on screen so much to actually interacting with people, and that may feel awkward. It's like a skill, it might be a little rusty. We need to plan and adapt and revise our daily routine schedule. And of course, we're going to adjust screen limitations. So let's get started with some questions. Hi, Deb from North Carolina. Carolina, I'm going to start with your question. Trying to help my son reconnect with classmates. He's socially awkward but super sweet. Tips. So this goes back to that first category of anxiety that I was talking about, social anxiety. So for children in particular, it's been a long time in their lives proportionally that they've actually been able to be in real time with people for more than like an hour or a half hour, to actually spend the day with peers. And so there is an awkwardness. People are wearing masks, so they can't read facial cues and information as well. And they may not exactly know what to say, how to begin a conversation. So what I think would be helpful for kids who are feeling socially awkward but want those connections is to practice a bit with you. To have some role plays. What do you say? What would they say? Or to actually for you to assume perhaps the role of your child and let your child be another student so that they can see what to say. And then you can switch where you're just repeating some of the things that your son said to you, and then they're brainstorming what to say. We might want to go over the rule, sort of review the social sort of accepted norms of interaction. How far do you stand? In the United States, it's about 3 feet. What do you do with your body? How do you keep your body to yourself? And also your facial expressions. What can you show with your eyes? Or how loud do you speak? Sometimes with a mask, people miss words. So I would go over all of those things. Now, in terms of health anxiety, I think it's really important to plan some kind of routine and to give them some information. How COVID actually is transmitted. Do they have hand sanitizer in their backpack? Do they have an extra mask or two? What are the policies going to be at your school for adjusting to in-person learning? Some schools have plastic shields, a lot of hand sanitizer. What is your school doing in particular? And then there's the academic anxiety. For a lot of kids, learning online meant making adjustments. There were perhaps the expectations for them to perform were a little bit lower. And now they're back in a classroom where there may be more, interpersonal distractions, and that will affect their learning. You're also not around as much, so they're more on their own. So let me check out the questions right here. Hi, Damon. Can I actually tell that my 3 or 4 year old boy has ADHD? I was diagnosed in kindergarten in 1986 for reference. Key question, can I tell? Your thoughts? You might be able to tell. I think it's tough in a young child because they're still developing. Sometimes kids report that there's always a motor going inside of them, like the train is always running. You may notice that your child is just nonstop, or perhaps very sort of spacey and is internally preoccupied. So you very well might be able to tell, particularly if you see some similarities between you and your boy. Louise, recently realized me and my 6-year-old son have ADD, no diagnosis yet. We moved to Wales in November, and he's having a hard time with the new school and missing the old house, and everything about the last place is better. He's not wanting to go to school. How to help him adjust? It's hard for a lot of kids with ADHD to shift, and that is one of the executive functioning skills, shift flexibility. And going back to school or moving to a new area is all about shifting, making a change, adapting. And so what your son might be telling you is that he's a little overwhelmed, and he's kind of flooded with all of these changes, and he misses what was familiar and known. So I would encourage you to come up with some routines right away and to validate that moving has been hard. There are a couple great children's books about this, whether they're by Kevin Henkes, Henkes. There was one book, I think it was called something about Mary Lou Mellon was the character. And of course, there's Alexander Who's Absolutely Not Going to Move by Judith Viorst. And I'm sure there are many, many more. So if you have some good books that you could recommend about moving, put them in the chat. We want to normalize the difficulty of shifting, and we want to try to make some adjustments to make this new place as, excuse me, excuse me, sorry, to make this new place have some of the characteristics of the old place, but to also shift the attitude that you're forging a new path where you are. Eric, my son and I are disabled. We both have anxiety, among other things. How can we get back into the workforce, Erica, excuse me, without feeling anxious? So, hi Heather, no worries. You can't actually get rid of anxiety. It doesn't work that way. It's how we're programmed. We need anxiety. It helps us get through and survive as a species. But what we can do is learn how to put our hand on the knob of anxiety. How do we turn the volume down, the intensity down? And when do we turn it up when if we're in a dangerous situation? So I think one of the things that helps with anxiety and that would be very helpful now in this transition is to create some phrases of reassurance that you can say to yourself and your son can say to himself. And I would write these down on little Post-its, or put them in the phone. Maybe that's the landing page on your phone, something that will encourage you that you have the tools you need to get through this. I'm sure you and your son have been through other challenging transitions in the past. What helped you get through those? I was working with someone this week who's very anxious about insects, and we were talking about an event in his life that had to do with something where he stood up and spoke at his 6th grade graduation. How was he able to do that? And what kinds of resources did he rely on in himself? Reassurance, practice that he could use with insects. And I know those sound like two totally different categories, and they are. But the process of anxiety is the same, because anxiety is telling you blah, 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 and you can't handle it. And what we need is to talk back to that voice, that anxiety monster, so to speak, with some reassurance that comes from inside of you. Okay, Michelle, my 8-year-old son went back to school 3 weeks ago. He was so anxious and worried to the point of the night before he got himself right into a right state. One thing his teacher did that helped him was that she sent him a timetable for the first week back. She had loads of fun stuff planned that made him feel loads better. That's fantastic. I think if we can lean on educators to try to help us understand what's going to happen, that can help anxious kids, and particularly anxious kids who are neurodiverse, make a better adjustment. Some kids might need to visit the classroom before school actually opens up just to get a sense of what it's going to look like. This would be very helpful. Or you could ask the teacher to take a picture and send it to all the students. Right now, what kids can't rely on is expectations, particularly based on how things were in the past. And Nelson says maturity level hard, far delayed versus peers. So it's natural for kids with ADHD to mature more slowly. We know that the frontal lobe, the seat of the executive functioning skills, coalesces in ADHD brains about up to 3 years behind or slower than neurotypical brains. And so what we want to do is set different kinds of expectations for kids based on where they're showing their appropriate levels of maturity, because maturity is not a linear process. It's really circular. Like at one time you do well with organizing, and another time you can talk to strangers, but then you might circle back and your room might be a real mess. So we want to sort of figure out some areas where the maturity level is similar to peers and try to really nurture those, and then pick one area where they are distinctly less mature than peers, and then brainstorm with other adults in their lives how to support your child, and then include your child in that process. Talk to them about it, see what would make sense for them. Angela, what is something I can do beside medicine? I'm breastfeeding. I think do you mean medicine for ADHD, medicine for anxiety? I need a little more information, please. Deb says, I always feel like I'm going to be the ambushed, leaving me unprepared to react, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So that is anxiety. That is flat out anxiety. And sometimes that occurs because you may have grown up with a feeling like you were never measuring up and you never could catch up. And so you always felt behind. And in those moments, what's going to happen is, in these moments now, you walk around with a certain kind of hypervigilance, like, when is the next time something's going to happen that either I can't control and don't know what to do, or I don't trust myself for how I might respond based on some past incidences. So I think it's important for you to figure out sometimes when you actually have managed ambushed moments in the past, what did you rely on? What helped you get through? This would be something that would assist you now, because if you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, like my client with the insects is afraid that the insect is going to land on them this time. She's afraid of things that she cannot control. What we talked about is, what are other times in your life when you have not felt a sense of control, and how have you managed those? Because we are all ambushed. We are all waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it has to do with our sense of our sense of competence and belief in ourselves that gets us through. And if we don't know what to do, who do we ask to help us? That's an important resource we want to rely on. Carolina, I can relate to the child from Wales, have play dates with 1 or 2 kids so he can make friends. Having friends is key. Absolutely right, Carolina. So, and I don't know if you're Carolina or Carolina, so I'm sorry. But, kids, particularly kids who are socially awkward, don't need 5 friends. They need really 2. One they can play with and another one they can play with another time. So there's a little rotation in there. You also might want to consider doing something with another family who is your child's age, who they get along with okay, because that would ease some of the pressure. The families are together rather than a one-on-one, which can be anxiety provoking. Shannon, can you give resources for shift flexibility? I think you called it. My son has a hard time anytime plans change without much notice. Right. So one of the challenges with that is because there comes along with ADHD a kind of rigidity. So and a fear, like I'm not sure how what's going to happen. I like to know what's going to happen because then I know how to respond or what to expect. And life is filled with unexpected moments. So I don't know, Annie, if you have some resources on shift flexibility, that particular executive functioning skill. But I think I do talk about that certainly in my book. And usually Attitude has tons of resources. So let's hold on and give Annie a chance to catch up. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Angela. Carmelina, we're in Australia. My son finished school last year, 10 last year, and tried out an apprenticeship. Okay. My son finished school in year 10, so I'm a little confused about that. The apprenticeship didn't work out. Now he doesn't know what he wants to do and is stuck in limbo. His father has said that if he doesn't get another job with 2 weeks, then he has to go back to school. So I'm sorry that the apprenticeship didn't work out. And we want to remember, because those brains, develop a little more slowly, that actually your kids might do better to stay perhaps in school a little bit longer, take a few classes, not maybe a full course load, but something so that their body, I mean, their brain can catch up to the maturity of their body. Um, it's hard for kids with ADHD to figure out what they want to do and what they're good at because they've heard for so long what they're not good at and how often they mess up. Susan, I'm seeing a lot of violence at school with my 6-year-old with ADHD anytime there is math presented to him. He explodes and lashes out. Physically, we're doing play therapy and seeing great strides at home, but at school he seems to lose all control. Heartbreaking and scary. Looking for resources to help identify ways to deal with his anger at the moment when it's peaking. So that's really interesting. I'm wondering if he may have a learning disability with math, and that's one of the reasons he's angry. It's hard for him. He doesn't like it, and he doesn't know exactly what to do. So I think that what we want to do to help kids who are young kids, is to notice, and we want to do this for older people too ourselves, is to notice, when the anger's building. And with a 6-year-old, that's difficult, but there might be some bodily signs. Maybe his heart is racing. Maybe there's a knot in his stomach. As soon as the teacher mentions math, the stomach goes like this. In which case, what we'd like to do is to offer him some specific tools he can use when math arises. And also I would consider getting him evaluated just to make sure his math processing is okay. Thank you, Annie, for that article. Um, my daughter has a service dog for ADHD, and it helps her to have a responsibility. It also helps her feel unconditional love. And pets are a great way for kids with ADHD to not just feel a sense of responsibility and a sense of purpose, but to feel loved for who they are. And don't we all need that? I think we do. Christina, I heard that kids with ADHD are a bit more vulnerable in the classroom because of their impulsive behavior and inattention to detail, like forgetting to keep their mask on properly or getting too close to their friends, not on purpose, of course. What do you think? How can we help our kids prepare? So this is a great question. Thank you so much, Christina. Of course, kids with ADHD are more vulnerable in classroom because they are more impulsive. And so obviously with the mask, they'll look around the class and see people with masks on. So I hope that will be a cue. But they may need some reminders. And then they probably will need some redirection about keeping their bodies to themselves, reminders about 3 feet of distance, maybe take out a tape measure and show them what that looks like. And when you're out at the grocery store or maybe getting some ice cream, demonstrate what 3 feet looks like. And then be clear, when you're on the playground, people can be closer physically. It's indoors that we have to be careful. So I would just practice and go over the information and then take it into real life so they can see what it looks like. Heather, my son has a class trip when moving to a new school, makes him more comfortable about moving to a new school. Well, that's fantastic. Awesome. Laura, my children and myself, we all matured more slowly than our peers, so I understand. My children are in their 20s. One is doing okay, the other is not. I'm sorry to hear that. He will not, he will accept help, but I don't know how to help him. Is there a resource for anxiety for a young adult with ADHD, OCD? Yes, I'm sure there are plenty of resources. The thing that we want to remember with young adults is that there's this kind of connected independence that we want to foster. How do we assist them and let them feel like they're doing it on their own? And so one of the things in terms of helping him isn't so much telling him what to do, but rather exploring topics with him and having conversations where he's taking the lead and you're reflecting what you hear him say. Or you might be offering 1, 2, or 3 possible options or directions. But if they come from within him, the chances are better that he'll follow them. If they come from you, he can very easily yes, but you. Yeah, but or I don't think that's going to work because, and then you just wind up where exactly you started. So you want to put those questions back to him by asking things like how, what, where, when. A little less on the why, because why is a question that you can answer very easily with, I don't know, right? Hi, Lynn, nice to see you. Beck, any thoughts on a redo for the year? 7th grader and would be going to a new school, new neighborhood too. So Beck, could you explain to me what you mean? Like, did you move to a new place and is your child been homeschooled this year and is not going to the new school? I'm a little confused. So if you could clarify that, that would be helpful. And Romansh, you said why, so I'm not sure. Do you want to know why about why not asking why? A little confusing there, but let me know. So, so we talked a little bit about, issues that in this transition, focus will be different. The things that are required on a student to focus on are different now, and they're not so much under, the spotlight of the camera from the computer, but they're in a classroom now. And so we want to assist them in brainstorming what kinds of things might distract them in the classroom, what things have distracted them in the past, and what are they going to do when they come back from the distracted moment. I call that the drift. So what happens when you come back from the drift? You're thinking about lunch, you're thinking about what you're going to do after school. Me, I'm thinking about a nice beach and a tropical place. What happens when you come back from that drift? This is a tool we want to teach our kids. Let's see. So Althea, nice to see you. Why debate with me? Just have him redo 7th grade at the new school. All right, so okay, so you're at a new school and he would have gone to 7th grade, and now you're having him repeat 7th grade at the new school. Is he excited about that? Does he feel embarrassed about that? What are some of the challenges you're facing? Heather, my son struggles making friends. He has meltdowns because no one wants to hang out with him. How can I help him? Heather, could you tell me how old your son is? That would help in answering the question. I see, instead of going to 8th grade. Beck, my question is he behind where he should be in terms of where other 7th graders are? In which case, starting 7th grade again in a new place might be obviously less painful than starting 7th grade in the same place. Let's see. Any advice for how to help my 4-year-old twin that does not have ADHD cope with my 4-year-old HD 8-year-old explosions? So when you have twins and one of them has ADHD and one of them doesn't, it's really tricky. And so first I just want to say to you, Debbie, I really feel for you, because the twin who has ADHD is probably drawing more attention than the twin who doesn't. And so that creates a dynamic not just in the family, but between the twins themselves, the siblings themselves. And that can create a dynamic of resentment and frustration. So I think one of the things that's important is not just coming up with house rules about what to do when people explode. So the rules are the same no matter who you are, but also making sure that you have independent time with each child. Because the child who does not have ADHD may feel slighted or may feel the need to be perfect because they don't want to be like that ADHD sibling. So we want to give flexibility in roles to both children, so both children can have times when they struggle and times when they succeed. Sharon, can you type a little bit more because I don't know what you want. Your son is 13. Okay, so 13-year-old boys, whether they have ADHD or not, often have trouble making friends. And I think, Heather, you said he has meltdowns because no one wants to hang out with him. So does he have might he make some friends with maybe some kids who are a year or two younger than he is? That might be easier for him socially and also emotionally. Do you have some family friends who have kids who are 11 or 12 or even 13 where he could come over? Could you do an activity where you invite someone to go with him rather than having someone come over and hang out? There's a lot of pressure on the come over and hang out thing. Does he game? Are there some kids that he games with locally who might want to come over? He might need some help with this. It's hard for neurotypical boys to set up social engagements in middle school. So if you add ADHD or a learning disability or ASD or twice exceptional onto that, it's going to be even more challenging. So I would sort of check out who are, acquaintances who maybe there can be a friendship possibility. For boys, a lot of times it's hard to understand that there are acquaintances, there are friends, and there are best pals. And so they may want the best pals, but they may really just have more friends and acquaintances. And it could take time and experience for them to build those relationships. Sharon, can you please share some advice for my 13-year-old dealing with her sister with ADHD, that's 10, with outbursts? So one of the things that happens when kids get into middle school, if they have younger siblings with ADHD, is they distance themselves and they're very annoyed with their siblings. Like, ugh, why can't you be better? And because middle school students are judgmental, they're critical, they're just feeling what it's like to be independent. So there's a sort of pushing you away and pulling you in. They don't know what they need. They know they need something. You don't know what they need. So what we want to do is create a certain culture of how to deal with upset, how to deal with feedback, so that it goes both ways. And if your 10-year-old is having outbursts, when your 10-year-old is not having an outburst, to sit down as a family and talk about, look, we all lose it at some time. What are we going to do as a family in those moments? And I do talk about this in my book. I call it Stop, Think, Act. And I have some information on that on my website as well, www.drsharonsaline.com. So check that out. And in fact, if I can manage to figure out how to do it, I'll try to put a downloadable for y'all in figuring that out, to check it out. Jillian, what's the difference between focus and concentration? Well, that's really interesting. I think they're usually used interchangeably, and this is somewhat mediated by norepinephrine, which is one of the neurotransmitters that's affected by having ADHD. It's also mediated a bit by dopamine, because dopamine is all about pleasure and reward and interest. And so what happens for kids and adults with ADHD is that interest stimulates motivation. So if they're interested in something, they don't have any trouble focusing on it. They may even hyper-focus on it. They're concentrated, they're alert, they're in it. But if they're not so interested in a topic, or a topic is tough for them, they're more likely to drift. They're more likely to be impulsive. They're more likely to be inattentive. So it's harder for them to find something interesting in something that's kind of mediocre or less than interesting to them, some nugget that they can hold on to so that they can get interested in it. They may need some assistance in figuring that out. Um, um, Louise, what you mentioned about the twins, is that the same for siblings? Yes, actually, it can be. I'm concerned that my 6-year-old son with ADD might resent his older brother, who is super smart and sometimes teases him. How do you deal with this? So, the thing about teasing between siblings is that sibling teasing can be, it's natural, it's part of what siblings do to each other. But, teasing a sibling because they're stupid or they're um, hyper or they're dreamy, that actually gets to something that your kids with ADD can't control. And so I think it's important in those moments to talk to the non-ADD sibling about what's the biology of ADHD, what the sibling can control and what the sibling can't, and that there is a bit of a delay in learning the skill for self-management. Just like your 9-year-old or the other twin has challenges, these are where this child's challenges. And I would really lay out, you have your challenges in this area. This is the area where your brother or sister has challenges. None of us are perfect. So let's try to figure out what is okay to tease about and what isn't. I mean, obviously you don't want teasing in general, but this is something that your kids are going to have to work out on their own. Because if you keep jumping in, the challenge is going to be that your older child is going to feel like you are an ally of the younger child and not the older child. So kids have to figure it out. So I would figure out what is your bottom line. Like, when do you jump in and when do you let them try to figure it out on their own? My son my children are 4 years apart, and when they were younger, my son would just dance intellectually, of course, because he was 4 years older, around his sister. He was 6, she was 2, he was 7, she was 3. And so he would sort of tease or taunt her. He never hit her, which was kind of amazing because she would annoy him, as siblings do, and sometimes she would bite him. And then, of course, there was a consequence for that. But he never hit her, and I'm continually amazed that he never did. But he would, put her in what was probably her place, according to him, with his words. And so we had conversations about how words hurt as much as bodies. So she would physically act out on him, and he would sort of um, mentally do gymnastics with her. Some of that I could intervene with, and some of that I couldn't. That's just how they had to figure out the relationship, and now they're pretty close. So I'm glad that that happened, and she also had to learn how to deal with him. I could help her. I would give her words to say to him. If he was being really horrible, I would separate them. I had my bottom line, so I encourage you to figure out what yours is. You're welcome, Sharon. Michelle, what's the best way to deal with my 8-year-old who has ADHD? My 4-year-old is the brunt of his frustrations. There seems to be a theme today. We're having a sibling theme. I never know how to deal with it. I always end up shouting at him for being mean to her. Okay, so this is kind of what I was just saying. So the thing is that if he's frustrated, your ADHD, your son with ADHD, he has to have other outlets other than picking on the 4-year-old. And so I would sit down and really, sort of outline those outlets. And if he's starting to pick on the 4-year-old, that's a time where you can jump in and say, hey, this is a time for going to pet the dog. Remember, that's on the list. And take a list of the things that help him manage himself or calm down. Put it on the fridge so that you can say, I think this is a time I want you to check your list. So that he understands that he may be heading off into a not great direction, and then he can work on managing himself more effectively rather than just exporting his frustration and dumping it on his sibling. Ruth, my son has ADHD but is also selective mute. This confuses people as it's always assumed that your ADHD you would have verbal diarrhea. No, that is definitely not the case. We're in the UK and a little behind on how assessments are done. So I'm sorry that, people are misinterpreting your son. And kids, who have selective mutism ultimately recover from that and learn to speak. I hope that he's getting some counseling. That would be really useful. You're welcome, Marjorie. Susan, are there any supplements that can help a child deal with anxiety and impulse control? I've taken ashwagandha root powder for anxiety, and it's very beneficial. I'm wondering if there's been any research on this with other supplements. Annie, I think Annie, could you post the article about non-medication supplements for ADHD? Thank you. Um, no, Romanch, we actually do talk about adults. So if there's an adult question that you have about reentering with COVID or something in your life, please feel free to ask. But because the topic for today was about reentering school, there are a lot of people with kids. Christina, I homeschooled my sixth grader this year because of COVID, and she did very, very well. But I'd like her to return to her previous private school next year because I feel she needs the social aspect of middle school, sure, and it will help her prepare for high school. That makes sense. My daughter wants to continue to be homeschooled, and she said the only reason she'd want to go back to her regular school is to be with her best friend. Do you think the social aspect and being with her friends is a good enough reason to return her to school? Well, I am super cautious about making, a proclamation like that is pretty heavy. I think there are benefits to being in school for kids, and that has to do with social emotional learning. And there's, lots of research about that. I mean, if you're homeschooling and you're having pods of kids where your child is interacting, that can supplement the time home alone. But I do think that there is value in that. I'd want to ask her if it's because she feels like she learns better at home. And then what does she see in the future? Does she see herself going to high school? What would that be like if she's not in eighth grade? Sometimes that transition can be difficult. Academically, what happens, in terms of what's the material that will be covered next year versus learning it at home. And also, what do you want? Do you want to continue to homeschool her? So there's lots of levels of this question. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about adapting and revising your daily routine schedule. Once kids return to school, whatever you've been doing at home for a routine will shift. Now, of course, there was, get up, get dressed, have your breakfast, and then you would probably go to a computer. Now we have to allow for more time in the morning because people are leaving the house and going somewhere. So I think in a quiet moment or in a weekly family meeting, you sit down and you say, we need to redo our daily schedule because now you're going to be going to school. So how much time do we need to allow for this, that, and the other thing? When is free time going to occur? When is free screen time going to occur? And how can we make sure that you're getting to school on time, getting the things done that you need to get done, so I'm not a reminder machine and you don't feel nagged. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about what kinds of daily routine changes do you foresee or are you experiencing right now in your families? The other thing that will need to be adjusted, of course, are the screen limits and when screens occurred and how it's occurred. If kids are going to school, then they're going to come home and they may want some, relaxing time. How are you going to connect that relaxing time to the homework? If kids are taking medication, do they need to do their homework first, like come home, have a snack, get to their homework while their meds are in their bodies, and then have their free time? How can you put the have tos before the want tos? So Romanch, you're asking, you can't do that without meds, LOL. So living with adult ADHD is super complicated, and because you struggle with things that a lot of adults seem to manage more naturally. But I want you to remember that you can't compare what's going on for you inside with what's happening on someone's outside. So if you're struggling with particular areas, Romanch, I would encourage you to pick one thing that you really would like to work on and improve and slowly work on that. Laura, I have used Alexa to help me with speak reminders. That is so great. Thumbs up on that one. For some reason, my kids hear Alex or Google more than they do me. Well, that's kind of like the I don't know if I'm dating myself here, but the teacher in Charlie Brown who always talked in this voice like wah wah wah, and never seemed to actually sink in there. So I've actually had other clients use Alexa and Google, and it's very helpful for kids, and also because technology is cool for kids, so it keeps them like using technology and feeling cool, even though it's telling them what to do. Lynn, Sharon would love to hear more about twin with ADD and the other twin without it. I am the twin with, and my sister twin was the golden child. I was always the problem child. So I understand that dynamic because I actually grew up in a family like that, where my brother had ADHD and he was the one who was kind of the problem child. And for me to sort of stay out of trouble and not be part of that dynamic, I tried to be perfect. And there are limits to both things, honestly. I'm a recovering perfectionist. I'm not recovering super well at the moment. Um, but I'm trying because I feel like that's a rigidity in me. It's not that I have to do everything perfect. It's that I like things to be at a certain quality, and then or I think I need to do everything instead of saying no to some things. And your perfectionism may be someone else's perfectionism may be different. But when kids are assigned to different roles in a family, where one is the good child and one is the challenging child, it kind of it damages their relationship with each other because there's a lot of anger and resentment, and it damages their relationship with their parents because they're stuck in a box that isn't actually true. Because my brother had had and has lots of great things about him, and I have my own struggles. But growing up, what was emphasized, that wasn't what the emphasis was. And so we want there to be flexibility in who we are in a family so we can have flexibility in who we are in the world. Cami, Romanch, what do you want to know? Cami, for our 17-year-old son with ADHD, how to best balance socializing with friends while gaming? Good question. With other school extracurricular activities when leaving home during the pandemic. Cami, this is a terrific question. Thank you so much for asking. So balancing gaming, having a healthy media diet is what the goal is for all of us, right? And so you want to, have time to socialize with gaming. That's an important part of being a kid these days. But that has to be a part of the diet. It's not the whole diet. You don't eat cookies 24/7. Maybe you have a cookie after dinner, or maybe you have a cookie when you come home from school, or maybe you have 3 cookies, whatever, but you don't have 17 because that's not healthy. So we want to create some sort of understanding about how the day looks, and the gaming, the socializing needs to be what's earned as that want to. So he does the have to things and then the want to. Maybe you have an agreement in your family that someone plays a sport, 2 sports a year at high school. We had something like that in my family with my daughter. She had to do a sport a year because otherwise she was an artist and she just wouldn't move. And so that was our agreement. You may have an agreement like that with your child, and it's healthy. It helps them get out. It helps them be part of a team and move around. Okay, let's follow up with some. Well, we have a couple minutes for some questions. 1 or 2 more questions. I think I got one, but I think Facebook did its disappearing act. So when you're thinking about how to balance screen, you may have different sort of structures around screen use during the week and on the weekend. And that makes sense because, on the weekend, kids need to let loose a little bit, and gaming is a way that they can do that. You're welcome, Cami. Oh, Laura, yes. Thank you for the advice for my 20-something-year-old. I do understand that this is about reentry. If you offer a seminar on 20-somethings, please let me know. Yes, I will. I recently did one for Chad. If you want to go to their website, I've done 2 seminars for 20-somethings. One was on college accommodations and one was on emerging adulthood for high school and college students. But I'm happy to do one sometime on 20-something managing, helping adult kids. There's a couple good, there's some good books out there. Jeffrey Arnett has written a good book. Hold on, I'm going to look at my bookshelf. Anthony Rostand has written a book called The Stressed Out Years of Their Lives. And Julie, I don't know what her name is, but she just wrote a book called How to Be an Adult. Of course, it's 500 pages, so I don't know how anybody with ADHD would necessarily read that book, but I'm sure there's an audio version that you could listen to. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really am glad that you came, and I wish all of you good luck with this reentry. Please check out my website, www.drsharonsaline.com, and I'll see you next week here. Have a great weekend.